I'm Paul Hamer. Harlan Hain and I went around the world in 1992 in the first Around the World Air Race. Harlan Hain's a SR-71 driver. He just passed this last November. He was 90 years old, heck of a guy. He flew everything from the SR-71 to the original Wright Flyer. They had a reproduction made, and he's the only guy we know in the world that flew both of them. Anyhow, heck of a guy. So Harlan and I met at a QB meeting in 1991. It was around September, I believe. There was an article in Flying Magazine about the first Around the World Air Race. It was just a little single column. I saw it, and it said, "You too can be a Around the World flyer." I thought, well, that sounds like fun. I just got my license 2 years previous. And so I was invited by Dwayne Clausen to a QB meeting in Omaha, and I arrived early, and I'd sent away, the article said for $100 you can send $100 in and we'll send you information on this race. So I sent my $100 in. I got this information on what was required to be in this race, and it required a two-person team, 1,200 nautical mile range. Primary pilot had to be IFR, co-pilot had to be VFR with extensive night. So I made copies of this, and I came to the QB meeting early, and I put a pile of them where you guys sign in at the table there. I just set them on the table. I was the only guy there. Like I said, one of the first guys. Harlan was about the next guy to come. He was already a QB member, and we had never met, and we got to talking about this and that, and I said, by the way, I said, there's this Around the World Air Race that I'd like to get in, and I'm looking for a partner. I said, there's some information. I left copies on the table. Harlan reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a piece of paper and said, look, something like this. He'd sent away from the information too. So right then we decided we would be partners. Now, he's at one end of the spectrum. I always said Harlan is high and fast, I'm low and slow. And he was 64, I was 36. So we really covered the full spectrum of flying. Like I said, I only had about 2 years, but I had about 400 hours, so I was doing quite a bit of flying. We started in on this, and we needed to raise money. There was a $9,100 entrance fee. Then you had to have an airplane with all this capability. We didn't have an airplane. We didn't have money. We had what we called wanna, and we wanted to do this, and that was our driving goal. So we started this September, October, November, December. We're working day and night trying to raise sponsors, trying to find an airplane, trying to get people to donate an airplane. I mean, we talked to Viking, we talked to Piaggio, we talked to everybody. Now, keep in mind, this is 91. This is GPS isn't even effective yet. All the satellites aren't up yet. The GPS units are just coming out. There's a lot of things going on. Another thing to keep in mind is there's the drug wars going on in Colombia, and they're trying to stop drug traffickers. So we're trying to get an airplane with long-range fuel tanks, and the FAA doesn't like airplanes with long-range fuel tanks. So we start, and we go October, November, December, January. We still don't have an airplane. We still don't have money. The race starts in June of the next year. And this is the route of the race. It's going to start, we're going to have to go to Geneva, Switzerland, and this is a top view of the globe for you guys that have had a little too much to drink maybe. And so we have to fly all the way over to Geneva to start the race. We're going to fly across Russia. We're going to fly over to Alaska, down the west coast to Frisco, across the USA to Washington, D.C., up to Goose Bay, Greenland, and the end of the race is in Cannes, France. The race takes 24 days, I think it was. So finally in January, we find some people in Ohio, TAS Aviation. They've got a 310R for sale. It's got run-out engine. It is a dog. It is one of the ugliest planes anybody's seen. So, but they'll sell it to us for $50,000. So they commit to go ahead and rebuild this airplane for us. And they'll do it at cost. We have been talking to a lot of sponsors. And anyhow, we stripped the entire plane. We put in all new instruments. We've got to have fuel for 1,200 miles. We want fuel for 2,000 miles. And We pull the engines, they go to T.W. Smith, get rebuilt, $26,000. We put in a total of 13 fuel tanks. Put in a nose tank, we put 2 tanks behind each nacelle. We've got the main tanks, we've got the tip tanks, and then we strip the plane completely, and we stripe it and paint it, and finally, April 1st, we finally get the bird for the first time. We're going to take off in 10 weeks to go around the world. This bird has not even flown. And we got a lot of sponsors. It ended up being a gorgeous bird, and it was very capable. And we take off on June 13th, 1992. We've got to fly over to Geneva for the start of the race. So we go up through Presque Isle, and if you look at this sign, it says, "Welcome to Presque Isle, exit only, do not enter." So it's just kind of a fun thing. And then we go on to Goose Bay, and then we fly direct to, this is Reykjavik, and Reykjavik, Iceland, is these tanks up on top is the water supply for the city. Was kind of an eyesore, so they built this big dome up on top. You can just kind of barely see it. They got a couple rotating restaurants. They decided to make it a real a go-to destination rather than an eyesore up on the hill. This downtown Reykjavik, we got a lot of sponsors. We had to raise a lot of money, and really the biggest donation we got was we got $1,000 from a couple different sponsors and stuff. One of our biggest things was small people. A lot of people wanted to give something, but they didn't have much. So we came up with this idea to give, if you give us 20 bucks in your business card, we'll fly it around the world, and we'll sign it when we're done and send it back to you. We raised over $5,000 that way. And I got to say, there was just a lot of people that came into us. Harlan and I flew around the world, but there was so many people, just dozens and dozens of people, hundreds of people actually, that came together. Dwayne Clausen was huge in this. A lot of people in the QB, Steve Stevens, Reg Urschler, people that came to our help in doing this. But the reason I like this slide is this is in Reykjavik, Iceland. There was a gal in California. She had pretty limited income. She only had $7. She wanted to donate $7 to us so that we could have a cup of tea in Iceland on her. And that's what this is a picture of. It was for her $7 that we got to raise a cup of tea. Then we continued on to England, and we did our final flight preparations for the race, all the charts and stuff. Now, something to say about the charts, you go around the world, these charts weighed over 100 pounds. We took the charts in the route that we were doing and we cut them into strips about 18 inches wide so that we'd have a little bit of variation on where we could go if we got lost and stuff, especially over Russia. They still weighed 50 pounds and took up 2 cases and stuff. Anyhow, we did our final flight planning at Lakenheath Air Base in England. When we got there, we discovered our intake manifold mount was cracked. We had to get that repaired. Then we flew on to Geneva for the start of the race, and this is the other people that were in the race. There was 28 airplanes from 12 countries competing in this. The French organize this, and when the French do something, one thing, they at least have some good entertainment. And one thing the French always do is a big spread. There was lots of wine and killer food and all these things. They put us in 4-star hotels and all along the way. Even gave us a good meal on takeoff. Now we took off from Geneva. We're on the first leg of the trip. Now there's a lot of people in this race, very experienced racers, been doing the Paris to Dachau, Paris to Australia, different things, a lot of races around the US. Harlan and I, this is our first race we ever entered. So we take off from Geneva. We got to fly over Germany. We're talking to controllers. They won't release us to fly over Poland. In the end, we canceled our IFR flight plan, said screw it, went VFR, flew direct over the Baltic. Well, we kind of hit this little corner of restricted airspace. And a couple of Viggen jets came up to intercept us from Sweden. Here we are on the first leg. We spent literally our life savings. I mean, for me to go on this race, I sold my house, I had a DeLorean, I had an airplane, I had a motorcycle, I had a high-end stereo, I had an art collection. I literally sold everything I owned except my clothes and books. The only things I didn't sell was stuff nobody would buy to go on this race. Here we are on the first leg. We're about 2 hours into it. We're intercepted by the Swedish Air Force, and I'm like, they're going to force us down, we're going to be in a prison, they're going to impound the plane. And we just wasted a couple $100,000 and 16 months. So anyhow, we look out our window, there's a guy at our 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and of course there's his partners at 6. We tried to get him on 121.5, we tried calling Sweden, nobody will talk to us. But the outside of our airplane says everything about air races, and apparently they could read English, and they followed us for about 100 miles or so. Finally they peeled off. We went on to, this is Helsinki, we went into Helsinki and landed, and we ended up in 9th place. And the other racers are talking about this and that, and they said, yeah, and we heard one airplane got intercepted over the Baltic. And we said, yeah, we heard that too. and to this day, I think there's some of the racers that still don't know it was us. Anyhow, the next leg of the race is from Helsinki to Moscow. And this is, keep in mind, this is 1992. Moscow is, the regime has just folded. We're some of the first people to go through Russia. So it's all new stuff. And the fuel for Russia was, they weren't sure of the quality. So what they ended up doing, the fuel in Russia actually ended up being some of the most expensive for the race. It was 12 bucks a gallon. We had to pre-buy it. It had to be put in barrels in Ireland and then flown into Russia, and they loaded it onto Anatovs and flew it from point to point, because we had 5 different places that we refueled in Russia. So we flew into Russia. This is just crossing the border here, and we flew into IFR. Now, in flying into Moscow, there was this little dog leg thing, and you had to fly up to here and then down to here and then into Moscow. Well, everybody was in the race, we found out, was using this IFR conditions as an excuse to cut corners and fly direct into Moscow. By the time the race was over, we realized everybody had cheated but us. So we come into Russia to what used to be a top secret airport. It was, the runway was 3 miles long, and you could land 3 747s side by side. As a matter of fact, 2 of the race planes came in together, landed side by side. We came in there, and of course you got the ever-present soldiers and stuff, and we took this is just a mosaic that's in town. This is one of the buses that you see how crowded it is. People are kind of hanging out the window trying to get air. Now this road is just oil-soaked dirt. This is a main artery going into Moscow. We went there and we were expecting so much more. That, you know, the Cold War just finished. We thought they were pretty much like America in a lot of ways, but really the nuclear war pretty much broke them. One racer summed it up. He said, Russia is sort of like Mexico with nuclear capability. They were that far behind on so much stuff. And the houses were just tin roofs, rusty roofs, ramshackle type thing. And the apartment buildings are just concrete, and this is all just Moscow, and you know, the buildings under construction, they just bring in raw logs. There's no curing of the lumber, and they're just building things. Pretty shoddy workmanship. We put this in here for the hotel room. This is our hotel in Moscow. There's no fans, there's no air conditioning. It's kind of warm. So it's kind of nice because you go to the park at night because you're waiting for your room to cool off, and everybody in Moscow goes to the park at night because they're all waiting for their apartments to cool off. And so we got to chat with people and talk. They're very interested in English-speaking people and stuff. But we put this in here. It's a fairly small bed, and we said as you went across Russia, the beds got smaller and smaller the further you got into Siberia, so that by the time you got into eastern Siberia, either your head was hanging off the bed or your feet were hanging off the bed. And if you tried to lay on your side, either your butt was hanging over or your knees were hanging over. They got narrower and they got shorter. So anyhow, and this is just kind of a view out the hotel skyline of Moscow. Just more of the buildings. One thing that was interesting about Moscow is that they don't have very many crosswalks. On the major streets, it's all underground. You go down in a tunnel and go under the street. And one of the reasons for that is just another kind of more modern architecture in Moscow that stands out, and of course the Kremlin. And this is a cannon that was left over from Napoleonic Wars. And of course, most famous, St. Basil's Basilica, with the onion domes. This bell is huge. Actually, the piece of metal that broke off weighs 11 tons. You can walk through that entryway without ducking your head, and they'll actually have weddings and stuff in this bell. When Stalin took over, he had all the bells removed from all the churches. A lot of the churches were converted to bakeries and stuff. Russia is about 70% atheists. This is storefronts. There's not a lot. In America or most of the civilized world, you're used to seeing signs on buildings and stores. You know, it's all about advertising. In Russia, you have to know what the stores are. There's a bakery, there's a department store and stuff, and things were pretty sparse. People were very poor. The army had just been laid off, so there was a lot of people on the streets that were begging, whether it was military guys, whether it was mothers with children and stuff. And to give you an idea, before 1992, the Russian ruble was worth about $2 US. By the time we got to Russia, that Russian ruble was worth about 1 penny. Think about that for a minute. That is just huge to go from $2 to a penny. So it just took so much money to do anything there. They had a museum that had all the airplanes of the Russian Air Force. This is all some of the MiGs. They had SSTs. They had with the drop nose. They even had something that was close to the SR-71. And this is the world's largest helicopter, an Antonov helicopter with twin booms. Just, I mean, this thing's like bigger than a 747. Just enormous stuff. And then we're coming back to our hotel in Moscow one night, and this is, if you notice, this is the hammer and sickle. The flag had been changed to a white, red, and blue striped flag. The hammer and sickle was gone. This is people wanting to bring the old regime back, because although the old regime was bad and a lot of people died, at least they had food and clothing and shelter and everything, and knew that they were going to be taken care of, where this change was just so upsetting. In this picture, this is in Moscow. Now when we landed in Helsinki, where we're 9th, after Moscow we moved up to 5th position. Now Harlan is the guy in the blue shirt here on the right. We finished 3rd. The lady right above him with the pencil in her mouth, that's Nancy. It was a mother and daughter team that had Tailwinds magazine. They finished 2nd. And the guy in the red vest is Robert Wall, and he finished 1st in a Bonanza. So it's kind of an interesting picture. And the lady with the gray hair was the flying grandmother, Ilsa DeVries from California. She was 75, flew a Bonanza. Then we took off from Moscow, and we had to fly on to Irkutsk, which is right by Mongolia. It's about 2,000 some miles, 2,600 I think it was. And we didn't take off till 5:30 at night. This is one of the times. There were 6 different days in the race where we saw 2 sunrises before we went to bed. And this is one of them. And we flew, and we had to land in Obsk in the middle of the night. And we had to refuel, and the clock's running, just like NASCAR or whatever. And we had to pump the fuel from barrels into the airplane with hand pumps or electric pumps and get back up in the air and continue on. So now it's getting to morning. We're kind of punchy, and we'd been up early in the morning, although we didn't take off till 5:30 at night. We've been up about 36 hours, I think it was, at this point. We're flying due east. We got 2 GPSs on board. They both see due east. Our compass says due east, and the sun's coming up on our left wing. And we're like, well, I don't know. Doesn't look right. But within about 30 minutes, the sun kind of rolls around and finally comes up in front of us where it's supposed to be. But for a little while, we were kind of curious what was going on. And then we start getting into, this is getting into Siberia. This is Irkutsk and Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal, by the way, is the largest freshwater lake in the world. Contains 1/5 of the fresh water in the entire world. It's a mile deep. It's over 400 miles long, just an enormous freshwater lake. And these are the AN, what are they, AN3s, 4s? AN2s, yeah. And this is, you know, seeing some of the, these have, now they're pretty popular and everybody knows what they are, but in 1992, nobody'd seen these airplanes before. And we all made the same comment, boy, these would be great planes to bring to the U.S. I mean, they're just enormous and heavy haulers, and they put them on skis and everything. And yeah, just kind of some street scenes in Irkutsk. And Irkutsk is right on the Mongolian border. And they sweep the streets with these old handmade brooms, and they cut the grass they wait till it gets about knee high, and then they cut it with a scythe. And this is how it was through all of Russia. This is Lake Baikal. And this is a little boat that they took out on it. This is a hydrofoil they took out on it. They use hydrofoils a lot, and then Harlan had to try and swim in Lake Baikal. He said, coldest frickin' water he's ever in. He got about ankle deep, said, take the picture! And while he was doing that, we had problems. We had, one of the things I forgot to mention was we had 2 GPSs on board. We had a Garmin, the new Garmin GPS. Again, there was only about 14 of the 26 satellites up at that time, so it wasn't real reliable. The government, the DOT, had what they called some Inmarsat, some deep satellites that covered the entire globe, but there's only 4 satellites, and because of Dwayne Clausen, we did a research project for the government with that GPS system on board. And we had problems with it, but we had a laptop computer. We could talk to the DOT at Boston, and Boston would relay our messages onto Omaha so that we were able to send pretty much live as we're flying along and stuff when it worked. But what we did was we set up what would later become the airline routes over the North Atlantic. In 92, when we did this, you still had to report every 5 degrees. You had to report your lat long, where you were, and your lat long that you were going to report at in the next hour, and where you're going to be. And you just went across the Atlantic that way, because that was all there was. If there was search and rescue, they knew where you were, what route you were taking, where you're going to be next, and where to look for you. Until GPS got established, but because of our thing that we did with the DOT, that set up the basis that started showing that GPS was a viable option. And of course that's what they use today and stuff, but in 92 it was a whole new thing. Anyhow, our DOT thing was giving us a problem. I needed to work on the computer, and we had tried to go to the airport. We were going to hire a taxi, and it was going to be $15. Sounded reasonable, but we got busy with other things and we didn't do it. So Harlan went off to Lake Baikal. I hired this guy, Igor. I found him in the park in Irkutsk, and I said, I need to hire you for the day if I could. He spoke English. I need someone that spoke English. I said, I need to go to the airport. I need to do some different things, and I can pay you. And he said, what I really need is some clothes. So I gave him a couple shirts that we had, Hain and Hamer air racing shirts, and he was my guy Friday for the day. He got the same taxi to go to the airport for 30 cents. So he paid for himself, timing, and then we went to lunch. We ended up spending the whole day together. Fascinating guy. A lot of stories just about him and Russia. He had just gone to Finland for the first time in his life when things opened up. It was the first time he was able to leave Russia. Had his first banana, and he was pretty excited about that, because in Russia you just had what Russia grows, and Russia doesn't grow bananas. So anyhow, and of course Lenin statues are in every city, everywhere you go in Russia, and just some of the architecture and more of it. And he took me to this. He said, there's a great view of the city. We'll go to this bell tower in this church, and this was the stairs going up there, and here's the best view of Irkutsk and stuff from this bell tower. But if you saw that, you saw the other churches, there's no bells and stuff, and like I said, they took all the bells out of all the towers when Stalin came in and turned them all into bakeries and different things like that. Then we had to leave Irkutsk in the rain and fly to Yakutsk, Russia, and we had to fly over some mountains, and the Russians weren't used to female pilots, and they said, well, we're going to route the females around the mountains because they shouldn't go over the mountains and stuff. Like, it made a difference. And this is the laptop I was talking about that you could, where we were communicating with the DOT and our home office in Omaha and stuff. And that CapSat is the antenna for the GPS. One guy said, you know, when you do long flights, he was an airline pilot. He said, you know, when I do long overseas flights and stuff, I walk the aisle. So that's what we did in the 310. Of course, it was only 2 steps to the back of the plane, 2 steps to the front, but well, you could stretch out a little bit. And then we went on to Yakutsk, and we stayed on a boat on the river because there was no hotels in town. And this is some more hydroplanes. Hydroplanes were very popular in Russia. Also, they have hydroplane airplanes that just fly in ground effect. Stay on the water and just a few feet off the water, and that's a popular thing too. And we went upriver, and they did this little, they have Eskimos type people, you know, same indigenous people in Russia like Alaska and the far north for us. And they put on a big feast. They had some roasted hogs and stuff, and did some song and dance, native costume. And this is some boats carrying all the trees like we saw the construction earlier. And all the buildings are heated with steam, and these pipes just run along ground. And we said, oh geez, you know, these buildings are, boy, getting kind of run down and stuff. They said that building's 6 months old. Paint's already falling off and stuff. That's where I talk about the construction quality and stuff. And these homes with the suede roof and stuff, big snow loads, and just not designed very well. But the old log homes that go way, way back, they were still pretty sturdy. But you know, this is deep in Siberia, really severe winters. And then we flew on. This is just flying over Russia. A lot of trees, a lot of lakes and stuff. Actually, a lot like northern Canada. And this is the Anatov that flew in our fuel. We landed our last stop in Alaska's in Anadyr, which is just across from Alaska. And when we landed there, again, we're pumping fuel into the airplane from barrels and stuff. Guy came up on the plane, and I thought he had a full head of hair. And it turned out he was actually bald, but the mosquitoes were so thick. They made Alaska look tolerable and stuff. It was the worst mosquitoes I ever saw anything. And when I asked the guy, geez, doesn't that bother you? He's like, yeah, you know, no, doesn't even notice them and stuff. Of course, there's a lot of vodka and things like that. Anyhow, then we flew. This is the plane that ended up winning the race, the Spirit of Rochester. It's a Bonanza with Dolly Parton tip tanks. And we flew across the Bering Strait. This is the first time I ever flew formation. Harlan was teaching me. And we flew across the Bering Strait with Spirit of Rochester into Nome, Alaska. And this is just downtown Nome, no big deal. And we changed oil here. We had Shell Oil as one of our sponsors, and they sent oil to several different locations. One of them was Nome. And we were walking along the road to the airport. Of course, we had these red jackets on that identified us as racers. And this husband and wife were driving along in a pickup truck, said, could you give us a ride? Could they give us a ride? We said, oh, geez, that'd be great. We're going to the airport. Said, by the way, it was a Sunday. We said, is there a laundromat in town? You know, we're getting kind of gamey here after a week. And the lady took our clothes home and washed them and brought them back to the airport and stuff. And that's the type of people you met along the way. And he worked at a gold mine they took us out to, just a dredging operation. Kind of fun. And then we flew from there. It gets interesting. We had the next stop was going from Nome, Alaska to Victoria, British Columbia. So there was quite a bit of a headwind, so we decided we would get across the Rockies on the far side and go down the back side of the Rockies. So we flew over to Northway, Alaska, which is over on the Canadian border, but we flew on the deck. And I mean, on the deck in a 310 is about the most fun you can have with your clothes on. 250 miles an hour flat out. We made the comment that we were going along good until a moose raised its head over a lake and we had to climb. So we went into Northway, we refueled in 11 minutes. Back in the air, we came in second going into Victoria. Flying down the backside of the Rockies was just some of the most beautiful sceneries. The Canadian Rockies, it was a nice day, sunny, it was gorgeous. And this was flying into Northway, just a little airport out in the middle of nowhere. But like I say, all these Canadian Rockies and stuff, just fascinating scenery. We're about 10,000 feet, whatever. It was just one breathtaking scenery after another. We got down into Victoria, and of course you're greeted by the mounted police, give them your passport and all that stuff. And there was this half car that they used. It was a Tornado front wheel drive. So that's what they used as a tug to push things around. One of the guys in the air race, Lou Webb, he was a car dealer, he said, I always got people coming in trying to buy cars for half what they're worth. He's like, I want this car to put on my lot so that when they come in, I got the car to sell you. Lou Webb, it's kind of funny, one of the stories of him, he grew up poor in West Virginia. He became a very wealthy guy in the end. At the beginning of the race, he said, I've been poor and I've been rich, and rich is definitely better. And then we flew down to Fresno, California. This is just flying through the U.S. And again, we're down in the valleys, just flying right, trying to stay out of the wind, so we're staying down below the mountains and stuff. Flew into Fresno, and again, it was nice scenery. And we finally, this was the one time, we had a day or two here and there, but when we got to Fresno, we had 4 days off for the first time, where the planes are really starting to suffer. They're showing a lot of wear and tear. There's a lot of maintenance that needs done and stuff, and everybody just needs a rest. So they put us in the parade in Fresno. We got a little rest. A lot of people were from California, so their families were able to come out and stuff. And when we took off, this is one of the things that's fun. We had to go from Fresno to Washington, D.C. And of course, again, it was further than the range of our airplane, further than the range of everybody's airplane except Spirit of Rochester with the Dolly Parton tip tanks. But we had prearranged to land in Cheyenne because it's at 6,000 feet. And we had them meet us. If you're familiar with Cheyenne, the two runways come together in kind of an angled T. And we landed on 3-1, and we taxied to the end of 1-4. And they closed the airport while we were on the ground. We landed, they met us with the trucks. They had 2 trucks with hoses. They had the pumps turned up as high as they would go. They put on 102.7 gallons of fuel, and wheels down to wheels up, 3 minutes, 42 seconds. It's in the Guinness Book of Records. So, anyhow, and we got on to, now we're flying along, we get to about Chicago, and Spirit of Rochester, of course, has been going nonstop. They're like, 92 Hotel, when are you going to land for fuel? And we said, I don't know, we think we can make it all the way. And the DOT system that we had on board, it pinged us every 3 minutes. It never knew we were on the ground in Cheyenne. Pinged us before we landed, pinged us after we took off, and by their standards, we were never on the ground. Then we got to Washington, D.C., and the TAS Aviation that had set up the airplane for us, they came out and did a whole thing, went through the engines, tuned everything up. And we'd been running them, I forgot to mention this, we've been running them at red line for the entire thing around the world so far, all the way forward, red line. And we said, what else can we do? And they said, you could turn the governors up another 150. So the rest of the way around the world, we ran 150 over red line. And we never had any problem with those engines. So now we had to go on to, the leg was going to be Washington, D.C. to Greenland. But the weather in Greenland was really bad, and it changes in a heartbeat. So they elected to end the race at Goose Bay, Labrador, and then fly off the clock into Greenland. So we flew up to Goose Bay, and we came in there. This is just northern Canada. It's, again, a lot of trees, a lot of lakes. The difference between this and Russia, you'd really can't tell. And when we came into Goose Bay, we're coming in. Remember, we're in a race. We're on the clock. And there's an airline landing. I forget what it is. An Airbus, I think it is. And they're on final. But they got their gear up. And we're coming up on this Airbus. And I mean, we're coming up. We're beside this Airbus. It's 3 airplane lengths away from us. I'm waving to the people in the window. We're that close. And Harlan says, oh, they're probably just practicing an approach. They don't have their gear down and stuff. And about that time, their gear came down. And so we were staying below them because who has right of way? The lowest guy has right of way. So we're trying to pull that and get them to let us in. And the tower says, do you see the Airbus? And we're like, oh yeah, we see the Airbus. It fills our whole windshield. You kidding me? And they said, you need to do an immediate 360. So we tuck in behind this Airbus, and Harlan cranks in a 360 where we come around tight, and we're right on his tail. We come in right behind it. It touches down. It's about 1,000 feet down the runway, and we touch down because your clock doesn't stop till your wheels are on the ground. Harlan had to go into the tower and have little bit of explaining and stuff to do. And probably just because of his experience in the SR-71 and all his credentials are what saved him from losing his ticket, because the tower guys were pretty pissed that we came in. But we ended up tying for second place. If we hadn't had that, we'd have got first, or at least had second and not been tied. So then we flew into Goose Bay, flew into Nuuk, Greenland. This is one end of the runway at Nuuk, Greenland. It's rocks, and it goes into mountains. The other end of the runway is a cliff, 3,100 feet long. And we're going to take off with full fuel, 290 gallons. The Bonanza with the Dolly Parton tanks, they're so overgross, they had to take off. Now, theirs was a 86, I think it was. It was fairly new. Anyhow, you couldn't, they only needed 10 degrees of flaps, but they didn't have a 10-degree flap setting. They only had a 20. So the co-pilot had to wait till they're right at the end of the runway, just before they're going to lift off, hit the flaps and pull the fuse after it gets to 10 degrees. And I've got a video of them taking off, and they're just kind of wallowing into the air and just barely clearing the rocks on the other end. They ended up winning the race, but I'll tell you, that takeoff out of Greenland, they deserve to win. Just for that, it's a miracle they didn't end up in the rocks. In Greenland, Nuuk is the capital. It's 15,000 people. One guy that had been living there 9 years said, winters here are absolute hell. There's nothing to do in town. It's a province of Denmark, so people come there to make money because you can make really good money. At the time, they were making 20 bucks an hour was a starting wage when, you know, most people were around 5. So they go there, work a few months, make some money, and go back to Denmark if they didn't kill each other or end up in jail. Everything is pretty colorful. You notice the steep pitch on all the roofs for the snow loads and stuff. And now the final leg of the race is just going to be a bunch of just different things of the town. Oh, we took a boat up into the fjords. We had a big snowball fight. We went sledding. Now remember, this is in July. Now we took off from Greenland, and we had prearranged to land in Shannon, Ireland for our refuel because, again, we didn't have enough fuel to make it all the way to Cannes, France. We'd prepaid for the fuel in Shannon, so again, we did about a 12-minute refueling. But anyhow, we took off from here. This is right as you leave the runway. Then there's all the glaciers and stuff flying over the ice cap. And again, following the ice cap up. And the ice cap, it's mostly white, and you can get disoriented very easily flying that. A lot of times people fly directly into the mountain because you've got kind of a white sky and you got white mountains. And the key is to look at the shadow of your airplane on the ground. When that shadow starts getting really big, you need to be climbing. So anyhow, flying over the North Atlantic with the ice caps and stuff, we flew into Shannon, had a fast refuel, 12 minutes. We got into Cannes, France, 12 minutes before the airport opened on the close of the race. We finished 3rd overall. That's it. And then coming back, we took off from Cannes. This is just the award ceremonies. They did a nice spread here again at the end of the race. Big villa up on a hill and stuff, you know, hoity-toity, and that's the awards. We got one of the 3 trophies. Then we went to Shannon, Ireland the next day, spent the night there, got up at 5:30, flew from had breakfast in Shannon, Ireland, flew to Reykjavik, had lunch, flew from Reykjavik to Goose Bay, refueled, and went down to Bangor, Maine, and had dinner in Bangor, Maine. We flew into Bangor, Maine. 16 hours later, we landed in hard IFR with Harlan flying, and I was looking straight down to guide him on the if we were going to hit trees or not hit trees, because we didn't have the approach plates. So anyhow, so that was we went through 37 time zones in 35 days. So that's about it. So. And just see what I left out here. Oh, the one thing that was interesting was in '92, Ross Perot was running for president. We tried to get him as a sponsor. I mean, even George W. Bush, see if we could get their name on the plane and stuff. And another one that we tried for was Coke, and their reply was kind of an eye-opener because they said they'd like to help us, but they couldn't imagine anything worse than an airplane upside down in the middle of Siberia with Coca-Cola written all over it. So that's why they declined.
How high would you go?
How high?
How high? Would you need oxygen on some of your flights?
We had oxygen on board, and we used it. When we flew over to Iceland, we flew at 11,000 feet, and I had a pretty good headache the next day. Anytime I get above 10, I'm a little more sensitive, apparently. Yeah, usually 15,000, something like that. Was 12 to 15 was pretty much, except for going across Alaska on the deck, we didn't need oxygen. Now, the guys that won the race, Bob and Steve in the Spirit of Rochester, when they left Moscow to go to Irkutsk, which was a long run, and they were able to do it nonstop again, Bob had partied heavily with the Russian pilots, MiG fighter pilots, the night before, drinking vodka, and he was severely hungover. And so he said, when they got in the plane, he said, "Steve, it's going to be your turn." And they're flying along, and Steve, you know, they go up to 20,000 or whatever, and Steve's starting to feel a little bit of hypoxia and stuff, and so they keep turning the oxygen up and turn the oxygen up, and he's just getting a severe headache. He's starting to get disoriented. Meanwhile, Bob's just getting happier and happier. They're turning the wrong oxygen up. They had Bob on like full flow of oxygen. Was immense help to his hangover, but Steve was suffering immeasurably. Also, that MiG pilot that he had befriended the night before, when we were loading up the plane in Moscow before takeoff, he came in, and I think the MiG of the day was the 29, and he came on the deck, I mean, maybe 100 feet, right over us, turned it vertical, lit the burners, deafening, but God, that was, you just felt it in your chest. You looked at the plane to see if the paint was burned on it. I mean, it was that close and stuff, kind of fun stuff. Anyhow, anything else?
Customs.
Customs?
Yeah.
Worst Customs was coming into Bangor, Maine after 16 hours, U.S. Customs, as always. Everybody else was pretty easy. In Russia, we just turned in our passports for a week. They gave them back to us when we left Anadyr, which kind of made us all a little uneasy. But the race organizers had things set up. Landing fees and all this stuff. Total cost of the race, people ask, probably somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000. Plane modifications, landing fees, and all that kind of stuff. And about half of that came from sponsorship and donations and stuff like that. And the other 100, Harlan and I each kicked in about 50.
What happened to the airplane?
The airplane got sold to somebody in Africa. So I've never been.
Long-range tanks, huh?
Long-range tanks, yeah. So yeah, when we were looking for tanks, Air America was one of the big suppliers of auxiliary fuel tanks, and they had just gotten busted by the DEA for helping drug runners and stuff. So they were out of the picture. The tanks were.
That brought you fuel. How did you pay him for fuel and bringing it in?
We had to pay in advance in Russia. We had to guesstimate how much fuel we were going to use and pay for all of that in advance. Whether we used it or not, we still had to pay. So you didn't want to leave too much fuel there at 12 bucks a gallon, but at the same time, you didn't want to be short and not have enough to. So there was a lot of pencil sharpening going.
How many gallons of fuel did you burn on the trip?
About 28 an hour. So depending on, when we were down on the deck, it was around 35.
What was total fuel then?
I don't, cost-wise or total fuel?
Or gallons?
I don't know.
That's fine.
Yeah, I probably got that number somewhere, but not in this head.
How did you manage
How many hours did
transferring?
you fly?
Huh?
How did you manage transferring from all those tanks you had?
That was a whole system in its own. With 13 tanks, you could only burn off the mains, and then you had to feed everything into the mains after that. So you would burn the mains off. The first thing you wanted to do is get rid of the nose tank if you were using that, because it was real nose heavy with the nose tank. I think there was 50 in the nose. And then you would start, we had 2 slipper tanks behind each engine, 20 gallons in each tank. So we had 40 behind each engine. Then you'd start feeding those to the main, and then the tips to the mains, and then the mains last. But if you did that wrong, you were just pumping it overboard. So yeah, it was a little bit of science going on there. So
How many hours did you fly?
altogether about 225 because when we got the plane in April, we flew it to Ohio, New York, California, several places. We flew it to Reno, we flew it to San Francisco, we flew it to Indiana, we flew it to Homestead down in Florida, Miami, all over, just trying to break in the engines and just get experience with running all the instruments. And like I said, GPS was new. You know, everything in this plane was new to us, so it was a learn as you go. We were still learning when we were on the race, so anyhow. Stay awake, Dennis? Yeah, okay.
Hey, how did you and Harlan get along the whole trip?
We got along pretty good. We really did. You know, there's some times where we were tired or whatever and stuff, but yeah, we got along good all through the planning of the trip and through the trip and even afterwards. So
What did Harlan tell you about winning?
he said, if we're not going to win, I don't want to go. So
Hey, Harlan.
because when we were entering, I said, oh geez, I just want to go. You know, I think it'd just be fun to be in this. He said, if we ain't going to win, I don't want to go. So it was everything. But anything else? Okay, thanks guys. Thanks, Dave.